The rain started just as Elena stepped out of the grocery store, the kind of sudden downpour that turned streets into rivers and sent people scrambling for cover. She clutched her single bag of essentials close, ready to make a run for the bus stop 2 blocks away, when she noticed a woman. She was elderly, perhaps in her late 70s, standing frozen just outside the store's entrance under the narrow awning. 3 heavy grocery bags sat at her feet, and she stared at the rain with an expression that mixed determination with something close to despair. Her thin jacket offered no protection against the deluge, and her hands, gnarled with what looked like severe arthritis, trembled slightly as she tried to grip one of the bag handles. Elena watched the woman attempt to lift a bag, saw her wince and set it down immediately, her face tight with pain. Other shoppers hurried past, hunched under umbrellas or sprinting through the rain to their cars in the parking lot. No one stopped. No one even seemed to notice. Elena didn't think about it, didn't calculate the cost or inconvenience. She simply walked over, set down her own bag, and picked up 2 of the woman's grocery bags without a word. The elderly woman looked at her with startled eyes, her mouth opening to speak, but Elena just smiled and gestured toward the parking lot with her head, a silent question. Which way? The woman pointed toward the far corner of the lot, where an old sedan sat isolated from the other cars. It was a long walk in heavy rain. Elena adjusted her grip on the bags and started walking, the woman following with her 1 remaining bag and Elena's abandoned groceries. The rain soaked through Elena's clothes within seconds. Her hair plastered itself to her face, water running down her neck and back, her canvas shoes squelching with each step. The grocery bags grew heavier as paper absorbed water, threatening to tear. But Elena kept walking, matching her pace to the elderly woman's slower shuffle, not rushing her despite the downpour. Halfway across the parking lot, one of Elena's bags began to split at the bottom. She saw it happening, watched the paper darkening and weakening, but there was nothing to do except walk faster and hope. The woman beside her was breathing heavily, clearly struggling with her own bag, but determined not to ask for more help than had already been offered. They reached the car just as Elena's bag finally gave way completely. Oranges and canned goods tumbled onto the wet asphalt, rolling under the car and across the parking lot. Elena immediately dropped to her knees in the puddles, chasing down escaping produce, while the elderly woman fumbled with shaking hands to unlock her trunk. The trunk finally popped open, and together they loaded the intact bags first, then gathered the scattered items. Elena retrieved oranges from under the car, her clothes now completely soaked, her knees wet and cold against the pavement. The woman bent as much as her aged body would allow, picking up cans with painful slowness. When everything was finally loaded, they stood there for a moment beside the car, both drenched, both breathing hard from the effort. The elderly woman opened her mouth to speak, reaching for Elena's hand, but Elena simply smiled, squeezed the woman's hand gently in return, and walked away before any words could be exchanged. She walked back across the parking lot through the still pouring rain to retrieve her own groceries, which the woman had set carefully on a dry patch under the store's awning. By the time Elena reached the bus stop, she was soaked to the bone, shivering, her teeth chattering. Her bus pulled up just as she arrived, and she climbed aboard, leaving puddles on each step. The driver gave her a sympathetic look but said nothing. Elena found a seat near the back, her wet clothes sticking uncomfortably to the vinyl, and pulled out her phone to check the time. She was going to be late getting home, late starting dinner, late for everything she'd planned for the evening. But as she sat there dripping and cold, she felt something unexpected. Not regret or annoyance at the inconvenience, but a quiet warmth that had nothing to do with temperature. She'd helped someone who needed it. She'd seen someone struggling and chosen to act rather than walk past like everyone else. The woman's face floated in her memory, that initial expression of despair transforming into surprised gratitude, then something deeper, recognition maybe. The acknowledgement that passed between 2 humans when one offers help and the other accepts it, both understanding the vulnerability and courage those positions require. Elena didn't know the woman's name, would probably never see her again, would never know her story or why she was alone in a grocery store parking lot, struggling with bags too heavy for her arthritic hands. And the woman didn't know Elena's name, didn't know she was a single mother working 2 jobs, didn't know that Elena had her own struggles and hardships that made stopping to help in the pouring rain an act that cost more than it might seem. But maybe that was the point. Maybe the most meaningful help happened without explanation or context, without the exchange of names and stories and justifications. Maybe kindness meant the most when it was offered freely to strangers, expecting nothing in return, not even acknowledgement. The bus rumbled through the rain-dark streets, and Elena closed her eyes, feeling the warmth of that quiet moment expand in her chest. Tomorrow she'd wake up with a cold from standing in the rain. Tomorrow she'd have to rewash all her groceries and probably discover something had been ruined by the water. Tomorrow she'd face all the same struggles she faced every day, but tonight she'd been the person who stopped when everyone else walked by. She'd been the hands that lifted heavy burdens from someone who couldn't carry them alone. She'd been the answer to whatever silent prayer that elderly woman might have whispered while standing in the rain, wondering how she'd manage. And that mattered more than dry clothes or convenient timing, or any of the small costs that helping had required. 3 days later, Elena was working her evening shift at the coffee shop when an elderly man approached the counter. He was perhaps in his 80s, well-dressed but moving with the careful deliberation of someone aware of their fragility. "Excuse me," he said, his voice soft but clear. "Are you Elena Rodriguez?" Elena felt a flutter of confusion and mild alarm. "Yes, I'm Elena. Do I know you?" "No, but you helped my wife Miriam a few days ago. In the grocery store parking lot, in the rain. You carried her bags to the car without saying a word." Elena's memory flashed back to the elderly woman, the rain, the splitting grocery bag. "Oh, yes. Is she okay? I hope she didn't catch cold from being out in that weather." "She's fine, more than fine. But she's been talking about you non-stop. She wanted to thank you, to repay you somehow, but she didn't get your name and couldn't find you." The man smiled. "I'm a retired detective. Old habits die hard. I went back to that grocery store, showed the staff a description my wife gave me, asked around. The manager recognized you as a regular customer and happened to mention you work here some evenings. You didn't need to do that. I really didn't need any thanks." "I know. That's exactly what made it so important to Miriam that we find you." He reached into his pocket and pulled out an envelope. "She wanted me to give you this." Elena took the envelope hesitantly. Inside was a handwritten letter on elegant stationery and a check. Her eyes widened when she saw the amount, $500. "I can't accept this," Elena said immediately, trying to hand it back. "I just helped her carry groceries. This is way too much." The man held up his hand, refusing to take it back. "Please, let me explain. Miriam has severe arthritis. Her children, my children, they live across the country. They're always after us to move closer to them, to go into assisted living, to admit that we can't manage on our own anymore. We're stubborn old people who aren't ready to give up our independence." He paused, his eyes growing distant with memory. That day in the rain, Miriam had taken a taxi to the grocery store because I was at a doctor's appointment and couldn't drive her. She bought more than she should have, got items from high shelves she shouldn't have tried to reach, refused to ask for help because she wanted to prove she could still do it herself. And then the rain started, and she realized she'd made a terrible mistake. She was standing there thinking this was it, the moment she'd have to admit defeat, call one of our kids, confess she couldn't handle simple grocery shopping anymore. Elena listened, understanding dawning. "And then you appeared," he continued, his voice thick with emotion. "You didn't ask questions or make her explain. You didn't treat her like she was helpless or pathetic. You just helped, like it was the most natural thing in the world, like her struggle was worth noticing, and her burden was worth sharing. Do you understand what that meant to her? I just saw someone who needed help. Exactly. You saw her as a person, not as an elderly woman to be pitied or dismissed. That gift of dignity, of being seen as simply human and worthy of help, that's priceless. He gestured to the envelope. The money isn't payment. It's her way of saying thank you and of giving you the ability to show that same kindness to someone else when you see them struggling. She calls it paying it forward, though I think the kids these days have a fancier term for it. Elena felt tears prick her eyes. She thought about all the times she'd needed help and been too proud to ask. All the times she'd struggled alone because admitting difficulty felt like admitting failure. Please. Tell Miriam thank you, Elena said quietly. And tell her she didn't need to do this, but it means more than she knows. My son needs new shoes, and I've been trying to figure out how to afford them. This helps more than you can imagine. She'll be glad to hear it's useful. But she wanted me to tell you something else, too. The man pulled out a small card. This is her phone number. She said if you ever need anything, even just someone to talk to, call her. She makes excellent tea and apparently has a lifetime of advice she's eager to share with someone who'll listen. Elena took the card, smiling through the tears that were now falling freely. I'd like that. Tell her I'll call soon. After the man left, Elena stood behind the coffee counter, holding the envelope and card, thinking about the mysterious ways that kindness circulated through the world. A few minutes of standing in the rain, a small act of helping someone carry groceries, and now this, money when she desperately needed it, connection when she felt isolated, recognition that her small kindness had mattered enormously to someone. She did call Miriam, and they became unlikely friends. Elena brought her son Michael to meet Miriam and her husband Henry, and Michael listened with rapt attention to Henry's detective stories, while Miriam taught Elena to knit when Elena's hours at the coffee shop got cut and money grew even tighter. Miriam hired her to help with light housework twice a week, paying far more than the work was worth but insisting it was fair compensation. You're helping us stay independent, Miriam explained. Having someone who can reach the high shelves and carry heavy things means we don't have to move or give up our home. That's worth far more than I'm paying you. More than the money, though, Elena gained something she'd been missing since her own grandmother died. An elder presence in her life. Someone who'd survived decades of struggle and could offer perspective when everything felt overwhelming. I don't understand, Elena said one afternoon, as they sat in Miriam's kitchen drinking tea while Michael did homework at the table. Why do you and Henry do so much for us? We're basically strangers. Miriam set down her teacup and looked at Elena with eyes that had seen both joy and sorrow. When Henry and I were young, newly married and desperately poor, we struggled, really struggled. There were weeks we didn't know how we'd pay rent or buy food. And people helped us, strangers mostly, small kindnesses that kept us afloat when we were drowning. She reached across the table and took Elena's hand. An elderly neighbor used to leave groceries on our doorstep and pretend she'd accidentally bought too much and didn't want things to go to waste. A man at Henry's work would forget his lunch and insist Henry eat it so it wouldn't go bad. Little lies wrapped around big kindnesses, preserving our dignity while meeting our needs. You're doing the same thing for us, Elena said, understanding. The overpayment for housework, the extra dinners you always have when you invite us over. We survived because people saw our struggle and helped, without making us feel small for needing it. Now we're old and comfortable, and we have the chance to be those people for someone else. You gave us that chance, Elena. You reminded us what kindness looks like, how it's offered freely without expectation. We're just returning the favor. 2 years after that rainy day in the parking lot, Elena graduated from community college with a degree in social work. Miriam and Henry sat in the audience cheering louder than anyone, and at the small celebration afterwards, Miriam pulled Elena aside. "I have something for you," she said, handing Elena another envelope. Inside was a check for $10,000 and a note for graduate school or whatever dream you've been putting off because you thought you couldn't afford it. "You carried my groceries when I couldn't manage them myself. Let me carry this burden for you now. Love, Miriam." Elena tried to protest, to say it was too much, but Miriam stopped her with a firm look. "Elena, I'm 81 years old, my children are wealthy and don't need my money. I can't take it with me when I go, but I can use it to help someone who helped me, who reminded me that the world still has people in it, who stopped to help strangers in the rain. Let me do this. Let my money become your education, which will become help for dozens or hundreds of other people when you're a social worker. That's how kindness works. It multiplies." Elena did go to graduate school. She became a social worker specializing in elderly care, helping people like Miriam and Henry navigate the systems meant to support them, but that often felt overwhelming and impersonal. She told everyone she worked with about the day in the parking lot, about how a simple act of carrying groceries had changed the entire trajectory of her life. "Small kindnesses aren't small," she'd say to her clients when they tried to diminish their own struggles. "They're the foundation everything else is built on. Someone helping you isn't pity, it's humanity. We all need help sometimes, and there's no shame in accepting it or asking for it." When Miriam passed away at 87, Elena spoke at her funeral about the woman who'd transformed her life. She told the story of the rain, the groceries, the splitting bag, the silent exchange of help offered and accepted. She talked about how Miriam had taught her that dignity and assistance weren't opposites, that receiving help with grace was just as important as giving it. "Miriam saw me truly that day," Elena told the gathered mourners. "Not my struggles or my poverty or my single motherhood. She saw someone willing to stand in the rain to help a stranger. And she spent the rest of her life helping me become the person who was already there in that parking lot, just waiting for the opportunity to fully emerge." Years later, Elena had her own story to tell when people asked her about her success, about how she'd built a thriving practice helping elderly clients, about the scholarship fund she'd established in Miriam's name. "It started with groceries," she'd say simply, "with seeing someone struggle and choosing to help without needing to know their story or receive thanks. The rest followed from that one choice, that one moment of putting someone else's need above my own comfort." She taught her son, now a young man in college, the same lesson. "Watch for the people who are struggling in silence," she told him, "the ones standing in the rain wondering how they'll manage. And when you see them, help. Don't wait for the perfect moment or for them to ask. Just help. You'll never know how that one small act might change everything, for them and for you. Sometimes the most important help is offered in silence, without explanation or expectation. Sometimes carrying someone's groceries in the rain is the beginning of a relationship that transforms multiple lives. Sometimes the smallest acts of kindness create the largest ripples, spreading outward through time and touching people who'll never know where the original gesture began." Elena learned that wet and cold in a parking lot 2 decades ago, and she spent the rest of her life proving it was true. If this story reminded you that wordless kindness can speak volumes, and that helping strangers can change both their lives and yours in ways you can't predict, please like, share, and subscribe. Comment below about a time when a stranger's silent help meant everything to you, or when you chose to assist someone without needing acknowledgement. Your story might inspire someone else to carry those heavy groceries. to stop when everyone else walks by, to be the help that someone desperately needs but is too proud to ask for.